and owned some land near the little river. Of course, back in that time, the only transportation in and out basically was the river, so the pioneers basically settled around the river. And his name is on the plaque at the Floyd County Courthouse commemorating his service in the Revolutionary War. And
What was his name again?
Moses Dickerson. And then there's a second Moses, his son. And in 1877, of course, the family scattered out. A lot of people left Floyd County, left this area because the country was opening up, and there were a lot of good opportunities in a lot of other places, Kentucky, Ohio, western parts of the country. But of course, some of us always stayed. And in 1877, 3 generations moved into a cabin on this land right here. And that's counting my granddad, who was would be born a few months later. And they were carpenters, and I think they added on to the cabin that was here and made it a fairly big house for that time. I can show you a picture of it if you're interested. And my grandmother was called Granny Susie. She had 7 boys. Her husband got disabled early in life, and but she made the farm go with putting all those boys to work. One thing she would do was rent them out to neighbors for working. Of course, when the pay came, she had her hand out for it. They didn't get a nickel. That's just the way things were then. One of those boys decided to stay, and he was my grandfather, Lafayette Dickerson. And he built a house on the other side of the farm that he lived in and raised several kids, one of which was my grandfather. And that house burned to the ground because of a flue fire many years ago, I think around 1920 or something like that. My grandfather and his father were both carpenters. They built several houses in the county that looked like this one you saw out here, which is a Sears and Roebuck kit house. And of course, to buy the kit, you had to be on a railroad. And so, but Sears and Roebuck also sold the plans, and my granddad just cut the lumber off the farm when he built this house starting in 1907. And back in that era, southern West Virginia was booming. They'd stripped all the timber by that time, but the coal business was starting up big time, and they were building a lot of facilities to handle coal and to house the coal miners, and of course businesses, associated businesses. And they both went up and worked in southern West Virginia to help pay for this place. And my granddad finally decided to give it a go, and he bought, of course the place got divided up with the various kids, and so he bought part of it back, and then moved back in about 1905, I think, and started working here on the farm. The rest of the farm finally went up for auction. He managed to buy it at the auction with borrowed money mostly, and somehow managed to put up this house and start farming. And of course, he had 3 kids, my dad and his 2 sisters, And my dad, of course, was the next farmer, but we left out of here in 1953 because two families couldn't make a living on the farm because farm prices were depressed, partly due to the high prices in World War II and the years after. So we moved to West Virginia when I was 5, but I'd already gotten the farming bug and decided that I wanted to farm, and I got to spend my summers back here working on the farm. But I didn't get to come back here to live until 1972 when I got out of the Army. And in that era, like most eras, we had a war going, which in that case was Vietnam. And Uncle Sam grabbed me by the collar in 1969 and gave me some training and shipped me to Vietnam. And I came back here in '72. And as I tell people, the Army took all the fun out of me. When I got out, all I wanted to do was work. Well, farm is that's the right place because everywhere you look, you can see some work that needs to be done. So I commenced farming in '72 part-time and went full-time in '75. And I've been at it ever since. And of course, all growing up, you know, I wanted to save the farm, and I was the man to do it, or so I thought. And it didn't dawn on me until I was up in my 50s that I was in decline, and that I would see a time that I wouldn't be able to farm. And that's when I started thinking about putting the farm in a conservation easement. Unfortunately, I didn't have very good information at the time, and just what I read in farm magazines, and it wasn't until the New River Land Trust got together that I found out what I needed to know. I went over and spent about a half-hour session with Beth Obenshane, who at that time was the executive director, I believe was her title. And within about a half hour, 45 minutes, she brought me up to speed on everything I needed to know. And I attended a lot of landowner meetings over the next couple of years that kind of filled in the small details that allowed me to proceed with the easement. So I believe it was, I think it was '05 when I finally completed the easement, or maybe it was '04. Time gets away. And so, you know, a cow can kick me in the head tomorrow, but this place will still be a farm. And I'm semi-retired now. I still have cattle. I used to do a lot of other things to try and make a living. I raised agronomic crops, corn, wheat, and oats, and processed those crops in my barn and sold feed out of that barn for 30 years. But arthritis finally started working on me, and handling 200 tons of feed a year was getting to be a real problem. And I got into some other things. At one time I had 5 acres of pick-your-own strawberries, and that went really good until the deer population picked up so much that the deer got most of the strawberries, and I had to go out of that business. And I had kind of got into the cash grain and feed business by accident.